Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Travers, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this live webinar hosted by Northern Irish Connections and Invest Northern Ireland. I'm up on the north coast of the island today. Don't know what it's like with you, but it's definitely chilly and autumnal. We're just waiting as everybody is clicking to join our webinar today. So welcome to all of you. This is going to be a wonderful opportunity over the next hour to bring together the diaspora with that shared interest in business and FDI. And this morning we are discussing the very hot topic of the rise of the hybrid workplace. So we'll be looking at future trends. What is the world of work going to look for in the future? And we'll be getting great insights from some thought leaders on the evolution of the smart office, and we'll also hear about their FDI journey to date from some of our leading investors in Northern Ireland. Now, we'd love for you to have the opportunity to also engage with our keynote speaker today and also our panel in a live Q&A session. You'll see the chat function there, so any questions that you have throughout the next hour, please pop them in there and we will endeavour to put them to the right person. But first of all, without further ado, let's go to our partners, Moira Loughran, Head of Northern Irish Connections, and Jenny Santiago-Young, Regional Director Ireland at Invest Northern Ireland, who would like to send a video welcome to this event.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here today on behalf of NI Connections, partnering with Invest NI's Dublin office for this event. Here in Northern Ireland, some of us are cautiously making our way back into the office, others are back already on a full-time basis, and others are somewhere in between, considering the various options and possibilities around hybrid working and all that that means. And so the conversation today is very timely, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panel of experts. At NI Connections, we've been really fortunate throughout the past 18 months to remain connected with many of the Northern Irish community right around the world. And we've benefited hugely from their expertise and insights as lockdowns and restrictions have been imposed and lifted at various different times across different locations. In fact, the power of the diaspora and their willingness to support us in our efforts has never been stronger. And if we look at this month alone, in September, Northern Ireland has welcomed 3 significant investment projects, 2 from the United States and 1 from Australia, all led by members of our diaspora community. And of course, it's not just in the area of inward investment where we've seen that support. The Northern Irish around the world and Friends of Northern Ireland have been hugely supportive across a range of different areas, not least of which supporting us in NI Connections in our efforts to promote Northern Ireland as a great place to live, work, study and do business. And so before we move into the main event today, I would like to invite you to be a part of NI Connections. You can find out more on our website, niconnections.com, sign up to our newsletter and follow us across our social media channels. All of the details will be made available at the end of the session, including my contact details. I would love you to connect and I would love to hear from you directly. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Jenny Santiago-Young and I am the Regional Director for Ireland for Invest Northern Ireland. We are here to offer investment assistance to companies setting up in Northern Ireland. As we move into the autumn, we know companies will be starting to consider what the new norm will look like regarding work practices. We also know every business is different and what may work for one company may not work for another. So with today's speakers, we have brought together a broad range of insights which we hope will give you some useful strategies to get the balance right across your own teams. We realise that the model you choose will evolve over the coming months, but above all, the aim will continue to revolve around motivating a positive environment to both attract and retain talent. We are grateful to have some great speakers here today, taking us on a journey as to how they have embraced these changes and grown successful teams here in Northern Ireland and around the world. Thank you, and please enjoy.
So thank you very much for those welcomes there from Moira Loughran, Head of NI Connections, and Jenny Santiago Young, Director Ireland for Invest Northern Ireland. As both of our speakers there said, we will have their contact details at the end should you wish to be part of NI Connections if you're not already. So we have a great keynote speaker coming up for you now. We've been all thinking about what is the new normal going to look like, what it will work look like, and considerations that you need to be taking on board. So we're delighted now to welcome Dr. Anna Gurun, Associate Director at HSM Advisory. Now, Anna directs the Future of Work Research Consortium, which is a collection of 32 multinational organisations, and you anticipate the trends shaping the future of work and how organisations will need to adapt and what they should do. So we are very excited to have you here today, Anna, and looking forward to your presentation. So I'll hand over to you now.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah, and I'm so pleased to be with you all here today. As Sarah says, I have the fantastic job of directing the world's longest running research consortium on the future of work, which brings together multinationals to co-create and respond to some of the changes that are shaping work, many of which, of course, are accelerating at this current moment. And so today I'm going to talk you through some of the lessons we have heard from these organisations as they start to shift their way of working to the hybrid model. But I want to briefly start on the next slide by taking a step back to examine why we're thinking about the future of work right now. So there's trends and changes that are accelerating and shaping the way we work, but what are the key ones to be aware of? Well, firstly, technological disruption is shaping how we live, work and behave. We're using technology now in a much more integrated way in our lives. We're used to a frictionless, seamless experience of technology. We use technology to order taxis, to order food, to communicate with each other. And I'm sure that's the case for many of you here today. If you think back last week, how many times you used technology to complete a task, to communicate, to work with your colleagues, it would be a very high amount. And secondly, employee expectations are shifting with a greater expectance of being heard. So many have realised the positive impact of being able to work in a new way, spending more time with their family, for example, or having more autonomy and control over their time. And they're expecting organisations to step up to this moment, respond to these changes and shift the way they work. And finally, increasing ambiguity and the need for agility has been revealed. Many organisations were able to roll out changes in the space of days or weeks that previously would have taken years or been unthinkable. They were able to pivot very rapidly, adapt very quickly in a very innovative way. And this spirit of adaptation and experimentation is crucial to take forward as you start on the journey to hybrid work. So organisations are responding to these shifts, and as you can see in the next slide, they're rethinking how they want to work in the future. So you can see examples here of the announcements from various organisations on how they are rethinking work, how they want to work in the future. But the common theme is they're thinking about the hybrid model, and they're taking the lessons that have been learned over this past year and a half of working and shifting the way that they interact with their people and what work means within their organisations. And so I've explored some of the changes that are driving this, but what are these lessons that you can take forward as you start to work in a hybrid way, as you start to respond to these shifts? And there are 4 key lessons that I'm going to be talking you through today. The first lesson is around how we work. So this past year has accelerated a change that was already occurring and revealed our ability to work in this way and craft new future ways of working. And when it comes to thinking about hybrid work, it's important to balance both place and time. And both can be fixed or scheduled or constrained, or they can be unconstrained. So time, for example, can be fixed to a certain shared hours that everyone works within. So the classic example would be the 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 workday. Or it can be unconstrained. People work in an asynchronous way, perhaps across different time zones, or flexi time, compressed hours, or working part-time. Equally, place can be fixed and constrained to one central location. So the classic example would be the office, or it can be unconstrained. You have the ability to work from anywhere, from home, from a cafe, from a different workspace, a co-working space, for example. So the design of work now potentially moves from fixed place and fixed time to any combination of any time and anywhere. And some organisations were born virtual and flexible, but for the vast majority, this is embarking on new territory. So we have an opportunity, as you can see in the next slide, to use these two elements of place and time to really drive productivity. So unlearn the bad habits of the past and really be led by what is needed for people to perform at a high level. But to do so, you need to understand what is needed for people to be productive. What does being productive mean? And how are these elements impacted negatively or positively by place or time? And there are 4 key drivers that I'm going to talk through with you today. So firstly, you are productive when you're energized. When you wake up in the morning, you're well rested, you've had your 8 hours of sleep, you've perhaps exercised, you feel very energetic, lots of ideas. You don't feel fatigued or tired. But you're also productive when you're able to focus. So there's lots of discussion around multitasking, and this is fine for very simple routine tasks. But for those higher value tasks that require human skills like collaboration, innovation, building relationships, you need to be able to spend time to focus. And both these elements are about aspects we can build ourselves as individuals. We can, focus on our own energy. We can focus on the task in hand. But for many of us, productivity is also about how we interact with others, about the relationships we have with others. So how we coordinate with our colleagues. Many of us are in complex job roles where being productive is not just about what you produce yourself, but how you work with your colleagues, how you coordinate with them to reach a goal or an outcome, to move through tasks. And beyond that, how you collaborate with them. So unlike coordination, which is much more about moving through tasks to reach a specific outcome, collaboration is those brainstorms, sparking ideas off each other, thinking in a new way with your colleagues. So you now have this opportunity to really redesign how work is made. And this will, of course, vary by organisation or by job role, as Jenny mentioned in the video at the start. And I would encourage you to think about your own experience, your own teams, and how each of these elements are impacted by place or time. Perhaps you have certain key moments that require collaboration, which are better done in the office. Or perhaps you have certain job roles that have a high level of focus, and so they can be done more easily at home. And on the next slide, you can see an example of an organisation that took such an approach, Sage, which is a software as a service company. And they wanted to provide a high level of flex to their people. They also wanted to be led by what was needed for the job, what was needed to be productive. So they mapped out employee preferences, and they also thought about what was most effective for each role type. Were there certain roles that required a high level of coordination and others that required a high level of focus? To create a hybrid working framework that was principles-based and not rules-based, to allow them to adapt as people worked in a new way. So that was the first lesson that we've seen from organisations. The second, as you can see in the next slide, is how we've had to engage with the different experiences we all have around work based on personal characteristics. And these can vary, and you can see some of them on the slide in front of you. It could be by care and responsibilities. So your experience of work, your expectation from the organisation can be different if you have kids or you're caring for an aging relative versus someone who doesn't. Equally, living situation. Your view of hybrid work or remote work, it might be very different if you have a lovely big office in which to work at home versus having to share with 4 other flatmates and work from the hallway on an ironing board, which is one I've heard from a specific organisation. So you need to engage with these differences and bring in different voices to the conversation as you start to work in a hybrid way. And these variables also mean that fairness becomes ever more important. And when thinking about fairness within an organisation, there are three elements to consider. Firstly, distributive fairness. So are the outcomes perceived as fair? Do people feel that their salary is fair based on output? Do they feel that they get equal support despite how they're working, if they're working in more of a hybrid way or a remote way? Secondly, it's about the process, so procedural fairness. Do people feel that they have equal access to project opportunities? Do they feel they have been fairly considered for promotion, even if they're working in a different way to their colleagues? And finally, and most importantly for you as an individual, it's also about the interactions that we all have at work. So interactional fairness. Are changes clearly communicated? Do people feel that their opinions and perspectives are listened to, and that this variety of experience has been taken into account as you start to work in a new way? And on the next slide, you can see an example of a company who tried to navigate these individual differences, Brit Insurance. And they brought together 10% of their population to try to understand their experience of work, what they wanted from the future, and what they felt was needed in order to have a fair approach to ways of working. And in doing so, they acknowledged the fact that people have different experiences, and they allowed people to feel accountable for this change, so to feel a sense of co-creation as they started to work in a new way. So that's the second lesson that we've seen around having to navigate these individual differences. The third lesson is how to manage the ever more number of boundaries and transitions that we're having to go through. And managing this has always been hard, but this past year has been even harder. So traditionally, work and home were separated much more clearly by place and time. And you move between these two parts of your identity very infrequently, perhaps 2 to 3 times a day. So the classic example would be your commute. So whether you drive, take a train or walk, that commute is a moment in which you transition from your identity at home, your identity as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, to your identity at work, your identity as a colleague, as a leader. But now, as people are working in a hybrid way or a remote way, we're having to make many more of these transitions between these two parts of our identity. And the boundary between these two parts has become much more blurred. It's much easier to keep working into the evening if you no longer have that boundary of that train you need to catch, that signal that allows you to step away from your desk. And making this increased number of transitions and this blurring of boundaries, it takes energy, it causes stress, and it can cause anxiety. And I'm sure that's the case for many of you here today. If you think back last week or a couple of weeks ago, if you're working in a remote or hybrid way, how many times did you have to make this transition between these two parts of your identity? How did that make you feel? How blurred are the boundaries between your home and work lives? And what this means is that as you're working in a hybrid way, boundary management becomes ever more important. So that means setting expectations and preferences through conversations, building internal periods of recovery within teams. So thinking of energy as a resource, something you can replenish as needed, perhaps in a moment where you have downtime within the task that you do. But it also means being intentional to protect these boundaries and avoid digital presenteeism. And this is something we've been hearing increasingly from organisations who have shared how the bad habits of the past of presenteeism have started to be replicated, but in the digital space. So people feeling that they have to stay online a little bit longer. They have to keep that green dot in the corner to show that they're working because their managers perceive this as work. So making sure that you're being very intentional in protecting these boundaries to avoid this. And finally, using physical boundaries to emphasize separation. So if you're working at home, having a particular space where you work, and if you leave that space, you don't do any work. So you have that physical boundary between your work and home identities. The final lesson is around our networks and how they have transformed. And you can see this in the example on the slide in front of you of network analysis within an organization. The pink diamond you can see in the center there, this represents one team within an organization. So say the HR team, for example. And they have very strong relationships or connections with each other. They trust each other. They work very closely together. And as a result, they're able to share knowledge effectively across the group. And that is the case even if they're working in a remote or hybrid way. The strength of their relationships allows them to be productive while working in a remote way. The second group in the top right there, this is another team within the organization. So if the first is the HR, this is the marketing team. They also have very strong relationships with each other. And they have an individual who has relationships within both teams, that line you can see joining them together. And this is important because research shows that new ideas come about because of the synthesis of different disciplines. Products come about because two ideas are brought together and spark a new one. And this happens because people have relationships across lots of different groups. So that individual, that line that you can see in the slide, they can take something they've heard in a meeting with HR or conversation with HR, and they can use it to enact an idea within the marketing context. But it's those the third group on the left there, that has been the most impacted by hybrid ways of working. And this is where our weak connections come in. And these are people that you don't know as well. So if those strong connections are your colleagues, your friends, people you work with day in, day out. Weak connections are people you used to bump into in the office, or perhaps someone you met at a conference and you haven't spoken to them in a while, but if you sent an email, they would respond. And these connections are crucial for innovation for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we tend to have many more of these connections because they're much easier to maintain. Unlike those strong connections, which require a lot of investment, you need to have a lot of time investment to maintain these strong relationships. These weak connections don't require as much effort. And we tend to have a much more diverse range of these connections, which allows us to see new ideas, think about different ways of living and being. And they're much harder to build remotely because we no longer have the opportunity to bump into someone, those serendipitous moments where you just pass someone in the corridor and you got chatting and you realize something sparked in your mind as a result of it. So you need to be much more purposeful in building them, as you can see on the next slide. You need to develop tactics to drive network building as you're working in a hybrid way. So again, being intentional, reaching out to a wider range of contacts for diverse perspectives. Identifying those boundary spanners in your teams. Do you have people who have strong relationships across different groups and you can use them to create new ideas? Being aware of how you and your team are interacting. Do they know their networks? Are they thinking about the relationships they're building and how they're spending their time? So that if, for example, they haven't spoken to someone in a while, they take the time to reach out to them, to arrange that coffee meeting so they can have that conversation that can perhaps spark a new idea into the future. So I've shared some of the lessons that we've seen from organisations about how to really redesign work in a way that is led by what is needed to be productive, thinking of your own context, navigating those individual differences and taking a fair approach to ways of working, managing those boundaries and transitions to avoid burnouts and digital presenteeism, and thinking about your networks in a very purposeful way and building them within your teams and organisation. But I have a poll I'd like to hear your view on of all these elements that I've discussed. So which do you feel is the most challenging for your own organisation as you're starting to work in a new way or thinking about working in a new way? Which do you feel would be the most challenging? Is it maintaining productivity? Trying to balance these elements of productivity while you're working in a different way, really mapping out what is needed for each role? Is it providing a sense of fairness? Do you have very varied roles within your teams and you're wanting to think about a fair approach rather than people feeling that they're getting something that others aren't? Is it the boundaries and transitions? Have people been talking about burnout? Has well-being been a challenge? Are people working too long into the evening? And finally, building networks. Do people feel that they don't have enough opportunities to reach out to those diverse contacts, to build those weak connections that are necessary for innovation and creativity? So if you can take a moment to answer the poll. Excellent. Great. So it seems building networks quite overwhelming as the most common challenge, which is interesting to see, and certainly one I feel has come up with other organisations, and would be interesting to see in the panel if people have also found this. So again, around this challenge, thinking very purposefully and intentionally, taking those actions that I shared, and trying to be very intentional in building them. Thinking back to the last couple of weeks, how many meetings have you had with someone new? And if you haven't, taking time to arrange one in the future. But I want to close by sharing this toolkit of action. So some of the actions you can take within your organisations to start to redesign work in a new way. So balancing time and place to allow people to be productive, building internal periods of recovery, but also setting expectations and preferences through conversations and making sure that fairness is embedded in all your approaches. Building in time for informal and social chatting, so to help build those networks that you're sharing is one of the main challenges you face. And being purposeful and intentional to avoid retaining those bad habits of the past as you start to work in a new way. So very much looking forward to hearing any questions that you have on this subject. So I'll pass back to Sarah as we go on to the Q&A.
Anna, thank you. I don't know about everybody else, but I find that extremely insightful, and lots of nodding. I've been scribbling away. Really interesting there to see the poll that it is that keeping connected, building the networks, those weak links, those conversations that allowed collaboration or opportunity before are just harder to achieve. But you've shared ways in which we can move towards that again. So I think sometimes it's just having someone like you be able to articulate what it is the problem and provide suggestions for solutions. Really, really interesting. A reminder, if you're tuning in now, we've a couple of minutes. We're going to do a Q&A with Anna. So if there's anything specific you'd like to talk about, maybe you'd like a little more meat on the bones around I mean, one for me, I wasn't able to vote in the poll. I tried there, providing a sense of fairness, that kind of, how do you stop people thinking I'm working harder than that person, or maybe they think I'm not working harder than that person. So please do send in your questions via the chat function. If I was to ask you to nail down, and I know you've covered so much, but what are the top 3 things that companies need to do to successfully deliver hybrid working there?
It's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think a few points. One, it really requires this intentionality and purposefulness, as I've shared, and that means understanding what is needed for your people to be productive. So what I shared at the start, thinking of the work that you do, so not being led by assumptions that people have of ways of working, but thinking the roles that we have in our organisation, what does being productive mean within them? How are each of these elements impacted by place and time? And then allowing ways of working to be led by that. I think it's very important to make sure that the approach is sustainable. So thinking about well-being as you're working in a new way, so that the burnout and the boundary management, as I mentioned. So are you really focusing on the well-being of your people as you're working in a new way? Or are you just focusing on the work that's done and the need to be productive? And finally, being experimental and adaptive. So this is really a journey that organisations are on. It's not something that you will solve now and then everything will stay the same. So maintaining that spirit of experimentation is very important. So really, as I say, being led by performance, focusing on sustainability, and then being experimental and adaptive, I would say, are the kind of key principles to have front of mind as you're working in a new way.
That's some 3 fantastic tips there. I especially like that, don't operate on assumptions, and try, give it a go, and if it doesn't work, the drawing board again. Yeah, nothing is forever. What about career progression? This is something that we're hearing a lot about. We're hearing, and maybe there's a lot of concern around younger members of teams when you're not in the office, or not in the office as much, you know, how do you progress? How do you have those conversations? How do you make sure that you're seen?
Mm, mm. Yes, and I think that this question of new joiners is a common one, isn't it? That how to join a culture and learn if you're not just bumping into people in the corridor as you did in the past. So I think, again, it comes back to this intentionality. I think that this is why it's one of the main things. So if you have, say, new joiners and you're thinking of the onboarding program, are there times that are being built in that previously would have been serendipitous? People would maybe just bump into each other, but you're setting aside time for them to learn from each other, to observe what people are doing, as they would have done in person. So I think that's certainly true, that kind of intentionality. Also, again, focusing those questions around fairness. So are managers, say, relying on assumptions? Are they assuming that there's a certain way of working, that if they see someone in the office, that person must be working hard, and someone they haven't seen must not? So really educating and upskilling managers to be aware of what is needed to progress by the work, and not just relying on what they see. And if they see someone in the office,
I suppose you always
challenges.
Sorry, Anna, I suppose you're looking at the outcomes, really. I mean, you did say sort of look at performance. Sometimes it's hard to see performance, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, you know, it's just being, you know, how do you get noticed? How do people realize, you know, how hard you are working as well? Oh, here we go. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing now, finally. If we think how far we've come in the world of work and everything that's happened, you know, 5 years ago, would we even have believed that this would be the way we're working now? What do you think the workplace is going to look like in 5 years' time?
I think it's important to note that all these changes that we're seeing, they're coming from an acceleration of existing trends rather than completely out of the blue. So in that sense, these trends, I think, will continue to accelerate. So this need for greater flexibility, for greater autonomy for employees, I think, is certainly one that we'll be seeing. But in terms of the actual workspace, what we're seeing from organisations is increasing use of technology within offices. So the rise of the smart office, I think, was mentioned at the start. So in the health context, that's been used so that if people have COVID, it can be tracked, you know, temperatures are taken, things like that. But you're also seeing it in the creation of different workspaces. So you have activity-based work styles. You have areas of the office that are for collaboration. You have areas of the office that are for focus. So when you go into a workspace, not just a line of desks, but different spaces for different tasks. I think that will definitely continue to accelerate when it comes to the actual physical workspace. But generally, I think the increased autonomy, expectations from employees, and needs to provide that from organisations, I think will continue into the future.
And I suppose as well, I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were saying, yes, they've gone back into the office, but so much of the work that's being done now is on a video call or a Zoom, or, you know, you're attending a webinar. So needing those little private spaces as well, so that the whole office isn't hearing you booming, whether you're presenting or talking to a client, and it's confidential. So I think everybody has been looking at how they can branch off and take those little hubs in the office, just to give that privacy that we've all got used to from home working, if you didn't have little ones running in and out. Anna, thank you so much for your presentation and for answering some of those questions. You're going to be hovering in the background there, and we're hoping you'll join our panel discussion at the end. But for now, thank you very much. Next, everybody, we're going to invite our members of our panel. We've a brilliant panel for you today. We've got Lorna McAdoo, Director of Operations and Business Development in Northern Ireland for version 1. So if you want to pop on your webcams and your hello there, Lorna. We have Rob Smale, Smale, CXO for Consulting and Professional Services at Sensee. Welcome to you, Rob. And as you can see, Fiona Daly, CFO from Codec. Now, rather than me start telling everybody what it is you do and your FDI journey to date and the home working, I'm going to get you to do a little bit of the elevator pitch. So Lorna, if I could start with you, tell us all about version 1 and how things are for you.
Okay, good morning everyone, or afternoon everyone. Lorna McAdoo, I head up operations in Northern Ireland for version 1. So we opened the office in version 1 in 2012 and with about 68 employees, and we now have a team of over 400 people in Northern Ireland. We're probably one of the fastest growing IT organisations in Belfast. It's been a fantastic journey, fantastic team now, and we've got a huge customer base right across both the local customers here in Northern Ireland, but also out into the UK and Ireland as well.
Fantastic. Okay, and you are the Director of Operations and Business Development in Northern Ireland. Brilliant. So Fiona, I'll come to you next, CFO of Codec. Tell us about Codec.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everybody. Nice to have the opportunity to speak with you all. So as Sarah says, I'm CFO here in Codec, and I'm also head of legal and talent. So I'm based out of our Dublin office, but we opened our Belfast office in 2015, and it's our biggest growth office at the moment. So in Codec, we provide professional services across the full Microsoft stack. And we also have a separate business, which I'm CEO of, called DSS, which is driving our diversity brand. So diversity is something that's very big in Codec and very big for me, which we can probably get back to later when we're discussing the hybrid working challenges. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And Rob, over to you next. You're with Sensee. Tell us about Sensee.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah, and thank you and good afternoon, everybody. So Rob Smale, I work for Sensee. We provide customer service services as an outsourcer for large blue chip companies across the UK. We started with home working. We are a home working only company, and we started 16 years with home working, bringing work to people. So it was all about the people. 30% of our employees, and we have 1,000 employees in total and over 100 in Northern Ireland. 30% live in rural areas, 20% have a disability. So it was about bringing work to people. And in Northern Ireland, as I say, we have over 100 people, and we're working with communities in different areas. My role is around consulting, helping companies, especially during the pandemic, with their hybrid strategies and their home working strategies, and all the lessons we've learned over the years in terms of systems and methodologies and people management. And specifically at the moment, I'm working on an initiative around community hubs as a form of hybrid working, where people can work from home, but also go to a local community centre and work in a small office, providing customer service support to our customers, our clients, in a local area. So again, staying in the community and bringing helping those communities thrive.
We'll come back to that in a minute, Rob, because it's fascinating to hear about the community hubs and the fact, you know, you've been going for 16 years and you've been doing working from home since your inception. You're probably the best person to talk to straight away. What do you think are the merits and the pitfalls of the working from home model?
I think for us, the home working model has worked incredibly well over the years. It provides, as Anna said, it provides flexibility. The productivity is high. People are happier, and certainly for us, our attrition levels are very low. So there's a lot of benefits to home working if you have the right solutions, the systems, the methodologies that overcome the challenges of home working. So the pitfalls, and again, Anna's been very lucid on this, is around isolation, around fairness, around making sure that people have a sense of belonging within an organisation. So we've built the systems over the years to make sure that that happens. Across our community of 1,000 people, we are focused on them as individuals and how they can thrive in our way of working. I think the biggest challenge to us pre-pandemic was that we were looking for certain people, they were looking for us, but people didn't understand home working or the existence of Sensee, and a lot of people thought home working might be easy, it may be a little bit of a sort of soft number, and so trying to find the right people who would thrive in that environment, be productive, love the environment they're working in, and making sure that we could provide them that employment was the challenge pre-pandemic. I think the challenge post-pandemic or during the pandemic and today is people have a much better understanding of home working because they've experienced it, trying to make sure that understanding individual preference, understanding the different opportunities within hybrid working. Again, with the consulting I've been doing, every company is slightly different. The employees, the tasks, the demographics, the location, the type of work they do. And so understanding that as a company, as a business, is challenging. And then finding the hybrid solution, again, very much the work or the presentation Anna did, understanding yourself as a company and what's going to work for you in that environment with that demographic, that type of work, etc., is the real challenge. From our point of view at Sensee, the challenge at the moment is we were a lone voice really evangelizing home working for most of our existence, and now our competitors and our clients and everybody else is doing home working, and being distinctive in a crowded market is more of a challenge for us, whereas before our challenge was we were a lone voice in a bit of a desert as far as customer service outsourcing was concerned and home working. So we have to get our message across about how great home working can be, and hybrid working, community hub working, and that we've got the setup to make that a great place to work for the people who come to work for us. So that's our particular market challenge today.
Okay, Rob, well, I mean, you obviously have that expertise and everybody will be turning to you now to find out more. And I think, as you said, everybody now knows what it's like to work from home. Almost everybody knows what it's like to work from home. Fiona, tell us a little bit about the return to the office for Codec. What is it looking like?
Well, prior to COVID, we would have had a flexible working model whereby some people worked in the offices and some people worked from home, depending on what they were doing. And then we were one of the lucky ones who transitioned overnight with COVID, in that we all had our laptops, etc., and VPNs, everything was in place. So it was BAU the next day after COVID hit, which was fantastic. And then since then, we've been working with all the challenges of ensuring morale stays as high as it can be under difficult circumstances. And we decided during that period that we would switch to a model whereby we work from home and we come together to collaborate. So since Ireland, as you mentioned, or somebody mentioned earlier, hasn't completely opened in the ROI, so that's a slower transition. But we found in our Belfast office, people were very anxious to get back. There's a very young demographic, and as much as lockdowns allowed, we said go back in. People were reaching out to us saying, I can't work from home. I have 6 people, in my house. And even just for mental health, etc., and well-being, they needed to get out, they needed to socialise. So we have found with that policy in place, the majority of people are back in the office in Belfast. And in Dublin, I think the commute is more of a challenge and people are taking advantage. But for any innovation type meetings where we need to bounce things off each other or brainstorm, we really feel we're a lot more productive together. And there's just a better morale, there's more crack, there's more camaraderie.
So what I'm hearing is you're still very much focused on the individual. It's not like everybody must do this and everybody, must conform to that. It seems to be that you're still offering that flexibility, but yet in the north, because it's allowed, people have chosen, maybe because of the younger demographic, to be back in the office.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about empowering your staff to make the decision. Everybody who works with us, because of our culture and our values, we trust them. we don't need to be monitoring them. We know that they're working, and it's not a case of, you know, have you logged on, or, you know, we've matured a lot more from that sense. One thing I mentioned in my introduction, which I'd just like to get back to quickly, is on the diversity front. One area I'm concerned about is if people choose to work from home, are they forgotten? Are they going to progress? And it does suit a lot of working women to have more of a flexible, agile working environment. Not that they're replacing childminders, that's not the case. And obviously, if you're working, you're working. But it does give that element of flexibility on the home front to log in, log off if you need to do a pickup, etc. And I would be concerned that it could affect the drive that in Belfast and Dublin we've been making on ensuring women progress to more senior roles. So I think that will be up to all people leaders to ensure that that's recognised and taken into the equation at you know, career promotion, career progression stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing, I suppose, if you're a working parent and there's been a lockdown and your children are at home, can't go to school, can't go to the childminder, but, you know, definitely working from home when there are other processes or systems in place, you know, it is a great opportunity. But yeah, I'd love to come back to that too. We always run out of time on these webinars. So interesting. Lorna, tell us a little bit about version 1 then. You're probably listening to the other two. Have the experiences been similar?
Yeah, it's very similar. I would definitely be, it would be very like what Fiona has just described. Like we would have always been quite flexible in our working approach anyway before COVID. Obviously COVID demanded that much more. So we would be offering a hybrid approach at the moment, very flexible around what the individual actually really needs and what our customers need as well. So we have some customers who wants to get back in some form of collaborative approach, whether it's a day or 2 days a week in an office. So we're trying to be flexible around that as well. The one thing I would pick up on what Fiona said, and I think most organisations will be able to offer the flexibility in working, but it's all of the knock-on effects, if you like, for the individuals at home that are more important now for organisations to manage. You know, being able to make sure that people's mental health, for instance, isn't being impacted in any way, that they understand the boundaries, that they aren't working to ridiculous hours at night just because the laptop's on their knee or beside them on a daily basis. So we actually started a WellTech program this year, which looks at all aspects of wellness within that technical environment that our people work in. So everything from making sure that they have all of the right equipment, but also making sure that they understand how to manage their time, how to take breaks. We've done sessions around digital fatigue, for instance, as well this year. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on the wellness of our employees at this stage, rather than now the flexibility, which would have been the big issue last year.
And I know for you, it was very much about not just saying as a company, we do this for our employees. It was actually asking them, you know, are they okay? Yeah. How do they feel? It was engaging them.
Yeah, and we would still do our staff surveys are every quarter, so every 3 months. We would gauge and understand if they're happy, if they've got everything that they need, if they think that there's something that we could be doing better, for instance, as well. So that has really helped to shape all of the programs that we have in place and are putting in place.
We've talked a bit, and Anna's presentation touched on this, and I thought it was fascinating, you know, that we've moved maybe from a culture of desk presenteeism to digital presenteeism. That puts an awful lot of pressure on people, doesn't it? It's like, oh my goodness, am I being productive enough? Will I just leave my laptop on all the time? How do we train managers of the future, or of now, for now, to trust? Trust is massive, Lorna. What would you say to that?
Yeah, and trust would, and like Fiona said as well, like we trust our employees to do a great job. I think it's more about, do the employees feel that they are trusted, and it's a two-way street really. So our managers are expected to have one-to-ones with all of their staff at least once a month. In more recent times, we've been trying to ask them to do it maybe twice a month. So we've tried to create an environment, and have, I guess, in a lot of cases, created an environment where people feel that they can reach out to their managers, that they can have open dialogue and open conversations about how they're feeling. Is the workload too much? Is the work too little? Are they being challenged enough? And to really keep that dialogue going on an almost weekly, daily basis.
Okay, Rob, I'd love to come back to you a little bit. I was very interested too that, 20% of your workforce has a disability. So, we're seeing the working from home, the hybrid offering is definitely much more inclusive. That must be something you're very proud of.
Absolutely, we're very proud of it, and we work with organisations, in those sectors, but also bringing jobs to communities and bringing worthwhile jobs to people. I think is we're very, very proud of, and being pioneers in that again is something we've been really focused on. I think what we have tried to do is create a community of belonging within the organisation and built systems to do that, so that people always feel that they are with their colleagues all the time through a virtual contact centre we've created. So whether you're in Penzance or John O'Groats, you are working with the team in a live virtual contact centre. And I think that sense of belonging and that sense of creating a community is so important. In a pure home working environment, it's absolutely essential. I think the other side of things that people have mentioned is the diversity and fairness, and making sure that you look out for the pitfalls around location bias or proximity bias, for example, gender bias, etc. So putting in place mechanisms that overcome those, so that again there's that sense of fairness, that communication is so transparent that people can see and feel that the right things are being done. They're not isolated. They can see what's happening. They don't feel distant from what's going on.
Remember, everybody, we've got another 10 minutes left. If there are any questions, this would be a really good time to type those in there to put to our panelists, or indeed to Anna. We do have an FDI focus as well with this webinar today, so it would be really useful to ask you now, first of all, Rob, why did Sensee decide to set up an operation in Northern Ireland?
I think, again, working with InvestNI has been excellent, brilliant. They've been so helpful throughout, and I think we understood very early on that the benefits of working in Northern Ireland, and them, InvestNI, holding our hands, introducing us to the network in Northern Ireland, the people in Northern Ireland, the fact that everybody seems to know each other in Northern Ireland, and that whole community side of things has just made it so easy to set up and work with different communities, working with the councils. It's just been a really good experience, and I think it says a lot about InvestNI, their proximity to the business world, but also really easy to work with, really easy to do business with. That's been our experience, which has worked really well for us.
Okay, and Fiona, same question to you. Setting up that office for Codec in Belfast, how has that experience been for you? What was Codec's path to actually locating in Northern Ireland?
I think it's probably the vibrant tech scene really that led us to Northern Ireland. Initially, probably from a talent perspective, but since then, and our customer growth in Belfast, and it also gives you a great window to the UK, to the English market as well, and that has been very beneficial. We've also worked massively with the local universities and have had great success. I mean, the talent that comes out of the north is really exceptional, and it does have a lower cost of living than a lot of its London and Dublin would be a lot more expensive. So even when we're relocating staff, that's a big, some people would choose to relocate to our Belfast office as opposed to our Dublin office. And InvestNI was very helpful as well from the get-go, have been hugely supportive in introducing us to contacts and it's probably my favourite office. I can't probably say that, but I love going to the Belfast office because it's just very vibrant. It's very buzzy. It's got really impressive people, very passionate, very driven. Our CSO is run primarily out of our Belfast with Dublin and all our other offices in Poland, Germany and Galway as well. But I have found the graduates particularly hugely impressive.
So tech talent and also access to the rest of the UK. Lorna, what about version 1? I know I'm speaking to a local girl.
Yeah, it's been very, very similar for ourselves. Like, I guess now we've been in operation for about 8-9 years now in Belfast, and it's been fantastic. The journey's been fantastic, both from a group perspective and a local perspective as well. And I think with the acquisition of New Ada 4 months ago, that was an endorsement really for the success that we've had in Northern Ireland. And the fact that version 1 do see Belfast and Northern Ireland as a key part of their growth strategy going forward, and a key element of the success that we've had to date. So that in itself has been fantastic. It has started us out on I guess a new phase of our journey. Like I said, we're over 400 people now in Belfast, so it's a slightly different angle. A bit like Fiona, all of our CSR is really led and directed from Belfast. In the early days, we set up engagement groups and governance groups, really because we wanted to be owners of our own destiny and owners of our own success. And we were very privileged, I guess, to have a board that got behind us and allowed us to do that. So yeah, a lot of those activities are led by Belfast here as well. So it's a fantastic time in V1. And like Invest NI, a lot of people say that they're a great organisation to help you get established in Northern Ireland. What I've found is that they're a great organisation to help you build in Northern Ireland long term. So it's a long term partnership that they create with the companies that they bring here. And I think that's been fantastic for us over the years.
Well, definitely having Northern Ireland locations seems to have meant great growth for all of the organisations, companies on the panel today. I'm going to invite Anna to turn on her webcam and her microphone again, just as we near the end of our webinar at this lunchtime, it's almost. Last chance to send in a question right now, but in the meantime, I'm going to ask each of you really for a takeaway for all of our attendees today, whether that's around hybrid working, the future of working, or indeed about locating in Northern Ireland. Anna, I suppose not the locating to Northern Ireland question, but a key takeaway for our delegates today around the future of working from you, please.
So I think I would say don't rely on assumptions, don't rely by assumption, but really by what is needed to be productive and high performing, and allowing that to flow through everything. So I think that's come up in the panel discussion as well. And rather than focusing on flexibility, focusing on what do you want your company to be, what do you want the experience to be, and then transforming as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. No assumptions. Absolutely. Look at the evidence all the time. Rob, what about you?
I think for me, I think it's looking at the whole of Northern Ireland and looking at the future of working and what hybrid can mean for each organisation. So looking at the talent pool, the catchment areas, the much larger catchment areas, and what that can bring to a company in terms of changing demographic, diversity, ways of working, quality, communication, all those things. You know, thinking of yourselves as businesses, what does the future of work mean to us given our circumstance, given our location, etc., and then think of that as an individual business rather than just looking at the sort of the major trends. Try to get into that detail and what it means to you.
Yeah, okay. Lorna.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me would be, you know, if you're investing in Northern Ireland, don't just look at Belfast or Derry as the key hubs to have those organisations. Because of COVID and the hybrid working and the way we're going to be working in the future, you know, you can have people across the whole of Northern Ireland now. Look at Northern Ireland as, I guess, a talent pool in its own right, from north right south to north and from west to east, the entire piece, you know, rather than just centralising maybe on Belfast and Derry.
Really good point, absolutely. That is the future of work. Fiona?
From an NI perspective, I would say get involved in the local community network. I mean, it's a very close network, well, particularly in the tech space in the north. I'm surprised Lorna and I haven't met before. We'll have to remedy that. But it's a great community, and it's very there's a good network you can leverage from. And then from the working from home, working in the office, I would say we're all going to have to take a holistic approach. There's no one size fits all. You can't draft a policy and think that the job's done. I think, as Lorna was saying, it's a two-way street. You can tell them what you feel, but you have to know that they're understanding it, trusting it, and believing it. So it's going to be a constant reiteration, and what works for one employee will not work for another. So we're just going to have to keep take the good things we've gained from the last 18 months and then try to keep cutting different iterations until you get it to work.
Absolutely, thinking differently and keeping it about the individual. Our thanks to the panelists today, to Lorna McAdoo, to Fiona Daly, to Rob Smale, and to Dr. Anna Gurun, our keynote speaker. Thank you very much to everybody who joined us on this webinar. Really interesting, lots of information there. If you want to stay connected, if you want to get networking, we've got some contact details there on the screen for you now. Moira Loughran, Head of Northern Irish Connections, Jenny Santiago Young, the Regional Director Ireland at Invest Northern Ireland, and Terry O'Donnell, Business Development Director for Invest Northern Ireland, all very keen to hear from you and staying connected. Thank you so much. That's the end of our Rise of the Hybrid Workplace webinar. Take care, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.